This is Charlie Wilson. This is him in a hot tub in Las Vegas. He's drinking like a fish and doing his fair share of cocaine. He's surrounded by strippers as well, but this womanizing, alcoholic, drug using congressman from an insignificant district in Texas also happens to be the guy who almost single handedly armed the Afghans in their fight against the Soviet Union. The most important thing about this film is definitely the true and amazing story that it tells. Okay, let's start by talking about how Charlie Wilson got involved with this cause. There are two reasons that Wilson got involved. The first of which is that Charlie Wilson was a self-proclaimed news junkie. He read an article talking about the Soviet involvement in the conflict in Afghanistan. This article highlighted the horrible things that the Soviets were doing to the Afghan people. The Soviets had invaded Afghanistan in order to help the Afghan government fight against the anti-communist Muslim guerrilla fighters. Through all of this, the guerrilla fighters would not stop fighting. This refusal to give up inspired Charlie. Charlie was a member of the Defense Appropriations Subcommittee, a group of 12 men in the U.S. House of Representatives responsible for funding CIA operations. Charlie decided to double the budget being used to support the Mujahideen guerrilla fighters. $5 million to $10 million. Still not enough. So that's how Charlie first got involved. Second, Charlie's donor and lover, Joanne Herring, was an anti-communist who was passionate about making sure that Afghanistan did not stay under the thumb of communism. She had visited Afghanistan and told Charlie her stories of what was happening there. In 1982, Charlie visited Pakistan and saw the suffering of the Afghan refugees who had immigrated there to escape. He heard the stories of Soviet helicopters destroying everything in their paths. He heard the stories of Afghan children being blown up by Soviet landmines. He decided to do something about it. He partnered up with CIA agent Gus Avracatos. Charlie Wilson worked to get millions of dollars to support the Mujahideen in their fight. They started with $5 million and ended up with over $1 billion from the United States alone. Wilson also united Middle Eastern nations to provide aid to the Mujahideen. Wilson also had to figure out how to get the weapons to the Mujahideen. Wilson got Pakistan to agree to help transport these weapons to the fighters in Afghanistan. Wilson's war efforts led to the end of the Soviet-Afghan War and ultimately the Cold War as a whole. But in the end, these efforts were futile in helping Afghanistan in the long term due to the U.S.'s choice not to invest in Afghan infrastructure. The next big thing that I want to talk about in regard to this movie are the cultural differences that we can notice between now and the 1980s. The first major cultural difference that I would like to highlight is the womanizing and objectification of women that Charlie Wilson took part in. This behavior would not be tolerated nowadays. The clearest display of the objectification of women in this movie is the fact that Charlie Wilson hired exclusively attractive female assistants. You will also notice that all of these women are white. Check out this scene that shows how the assistants were hired with full knowledge of this inappropriate practice. This scene puts on full display Charlie's attitude towards women.
Miss, yes, sir. It seems to me, that it's almost all women working here, and that they're all very pretty. Is that common?
Well, Congressman Wilson, he has an expression. He says you can teach him to type, but you can't teach him to grow tits.
The major cultural difference that I noticed was the frequent use of cigarettes and alcohol in work and social settings. Everyone seems to be smoking through the entirety of the movie. Nowadays, you can't smoke in federal buildings, most apartment buildings, and a significant amount of bars and restaurants. Charlie also used cocaine and drank to excess often in public. In modern times, a congressman would be caught easily due to the presence of technology, and re-election would become unlikely. Check out this clip that shows how Charlie abused alcohol.
Washington Times wants to know if you've ever been in rehab.
Well, what are you going to tell me?
You won't go to rehab because they don't serve whiskey there.
Well, that's why you're the press secretary, boo-boo.
A significant cultural shift that I noticed was the fact that an employee of the CIA referred to first and second generation Americans as being barely American. He used this to justify a decision that a colleague made to fire these agents. Most people in the 1980s were not like Charlie Wilson, but the fact that he was able to get away with the things he did is a display of a change in culture in itself. Charlie Wilson's war tells us a significant amount about a historical event that we often ignore, and it shows some cultural shifts from the 1980s to the present.